No, the title is not clickbait. I'm really about to blame movement shooters for my disdain for regular shooters. And no, before you ask, this isn't a cope video. Okay, it's kind of a cope video, but at the very least, I think it's a good cope. Kinda. Honestly, it all depends on if I can even describe what a movement shooter is, because looking it up resulted in just shooter go fast, which isn't really anything. So I'm gonna kind of have to make my own definition, because right now, what a movement shooter is under a very, very big umbrella.
And it goes a little something like...
So, what is a movement shooter? Truth be told, I don't really know. Like I said, Adderall shooter is pretty much the universal definition, which gives me literally nothing to work off of. So I'm gonna do a gamer move and pad out the video by looking at some influential movement shooters and just kind of trying to understand what makes a movement shooter. The two big ones being Doom and Titanfall 2, because if you're fast with a double jump, you're called Doom, and if you have a wall run, you're called Titanfall 2. You don't really get a choice in the matter, and if you have anything else, then you're just probably on a wish list. Which is fair in Doom's case, because it started the core elements that you'd still see in movement shooters now. The first being speed, go figure, and the second being that you can't be stationary. The second rule is a bit weird to explain, but trust me, I will later. But first, let's talk about the movement. Doom is a game that centers around high-speed movement to the point that there's a fucking auto-run button that I guarantee you have ticked. But due to the engine and the fact that this game was pushing it even back then, the movement is centered entirely on the ground and pretty much 0% in the air. You're practically glued to the floor, and when you're not glued to the floor, you're being anchored back towards it. Another thing is that since they can't really do anything with the level design elevation-wise, it just results in a lot of closed corridors and big boxes in the levels. The limited control scheme really fucked them up, and the fact that they can't really add anything where the fights take place, with the most you'll see in an elevation change being an enemy on an obelisk you can't even reach. But going back on topic, the game really does just boil down to move fast and shoot faster. It really starts to take its shine on that inability to be stationary thing. As opposed to regular shooters, you can't really just take cover and aim down the sights, because for starters, it's not even a gameplay option, and even if it was, you'd get curb stomped for doing it. To be fair though, you can kind of do this weird peeking thing for the first few levels, but once pinkies are introduced, no, you're getting your ass beat. This pretty much forces you to always remain in the crossfire. This in turn makes the movement both a force of defense and offense, as you use it to position yourself and shoot enemies while also using it to avoid fire. Fights can become this weird tug of war between dishing damage and dealing it, becoming this mix of John Wick and tap dancing. The shooting itself is alright, but can feel weird due to how the engine functions. Then I will try to explain it, but even just the Wikipedia article for idTech 1 is a lot, but I'm gonna try to explain it as best as my dumb, no-experience brain can. Basically, everything in Doom exists on a 2D plane, giving off the illusion question mark of a 3D environment. So really the depth of the levels isn't really there, and everything kind of exists parallel on one plane when it feels like it doesn't. This results in being able to hit enemies in essentially a big rectangle where the reticle is, and allows you to do dumb shit like this. It also just makes aiming feel off, mainly due to how used to actually aiming at the enemy I am, so it feels awkward to shoot at a demon that looks like not even a huge sneeze could hit it, and then it just dies. But hell, back when this game came out, it probably felt pretty cool. And on a floppy disk. Okay, moving on though. Regardless of how basic Doom is, it's a perfect blueprint for what will become the movement shooter genre, with said blueprints being improved upon a few years later by yet another id game. Quake is where things really start to come together, which you can really tell in the faster pace and the inclusion of the almighty jump button, which now allows for basic platforming instead of corridors and divots. Also real quick, I just want to point out what the first screen of the game looks like. Jesus Christ. Oh, and don't worry, this game gets way more fucking metal than that. Beyond that though, the game admittedly doesn't offer a lot to talk about in the movement department other than just being a step up from Doom and a step towards modern movement shooters. Like I said, it's marginally faster, which in part is due to how unbelievably vicious enemies are in this game. Seriously though, the fiends are just unhinged. They will go to literally every length to make sure that they will get you, even if it means throwing themselves into the fucking ocean. Hell, these bastards will jump across the continent if it means even taking a little bit of your health down. It's borderline suicidal. The game features actually competent platforming and its effects are readily apparent. Arenas are now much bigger and usually have platforms spanning throughout them that you can jump to. It's also not uncommon to see an area with 2 or 3 levels of elevation with things like ogres and grunts placed on the higher levels. It also features things like environmental hazards that play into the fights as well, like a moving platform that brings you through multiple waves of enemies, or spikes that shoot throughout the entire room, damaging everyone in this area of effect. Remember that bit where I said that there isn't a whole lot to talk about movement-wise as opposed to Doom? Well, that was a fucking lie because there's actually a lot to talk about. For starters, this is the first game to feature a modern version of the rocket jump. Technically speaking, Doom had a rocket jump, but it was more like a vertical jump and only useful in one location. Here, its importance is fucking omnipresent. You can skip entire sections of the level or just bypass a fight you just don't want to deal with. There's a reason why other games in the Quake series and just other shooters in general would incorporate rocket jumps because it's just so much goddamn fun. It's also super easy to pull off too, just jump and shoot and Angry Bird your way to an unsuspecting enemy. In addition to rocket jumps, there's also things like strafe jumping and bunny hopping, which in tandem with rocket jumping just creates ludicrous amounts of speed. Like fucking look at, I don't even know what the hell is happening here. I can't really comment much on strafe jumping or bunny hopping because I can't do either. So, here's the Quake wiki page on it. You can also swim in this game. In terms of gunplay though, there really isn't anything to comment here that isn't in Doom. You can actually aim in this game though due to the fact that the Quake engine is an actual 3D engine, but other than that, there really isn't anything here. I mean, except for the fact that one of the guns is a fucking nail launcher, that's pretty metal. But man, genuinely speaking, I'm so mad that I have to keep this segment so short because, God, Quake might be one of my favorite shooters of all time. It's just so fucking good. I love genuinely everything about it. The level design, the enemy design, the weapons, the music, the art style, it's so fucking charming. And it's like $10. It's not that expensive. Just fucking buy the game. It's on Game Pass for free. There's literally no reason why you can't fuck. So we have some very basic ideas that form the vague idea of a movement shooter. Admittedly though, these concepts don't seem like a lot on paper, but in conjunction with other movement options can actually create some pretty damn good gameplay. The best example being, if Doom and Quake is where movement shooters walked, Titanfall 2 is where they started to run. Now, I know Titanfall 2 isn't the first game to actually implement options like these, but like, it's definitely the best example of it. It's a shame though, because Titanfall 2 is such an underrated game, mostly in part due to how terrible the first one was, and the fact that the first game was also 1,000,000 gigabytes, which in case you didn't know, was entirely because it was full of uncompressed WAV files, which are the biggest audio files you can use. Why the fuck? All of the concepts are present here along with the newly added double jump and wall run, which on paper don't seem like a lot, but they completely open up what can be done from a movement standpoint alone. And they knew they had something good on their hands because right off the bat, the game opens you up with the opportunity to run a gauntlet. Well, they call it a gauntlet, but it's more like a single level, but whatever. It's this Wipeout style parkour thing where you have to get to the end as fast as possible. What's actually pretty neat about it though is that how you do in the gauntlet determines what difficulty you put on by default. That has nothing to do with the actual video, but I just found it pretty cool. But what really elevates the gauntlet is that the first time around you're probably gonna get a pretty average time, and then you see that this dick got in 25 seconds. So you try it again, and 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 every time you try you get a little bit faster, and then it clicks that this game feels great. But then the game actually starts. The game is broken up into 2 different sections, platforming and combat, which I'm going to get into the latter later because there's a lot to talk about just the platforming alone. They take these core elements of the movement and push it to its absolute limits with gimmicks that appear in every level. For example, the level Into the Abyss takes place in a huge factory manufacturing Minecraft chunks, in which the entire level revolves around you going through this facility and jumping through these chunks while they're being built. And towards the end, they place all the chunks vertically, and you have to climb up the entirety of a battlefield while it's placed on its side. And then the level Cause and Effect introduces time travel, and not only is this level the best mission in the game, but it's also one of the best missions of any shooter ever made.
Pilot
You constantly switch through the past and the present, seeing the factory before and after it got ruined, and the landscape changes depending on which version you're in. Not only does it affect gameplay by having different variants of enemies you have to go back and forth between fighting, but it also changes where and when you can wall run and slide, forcing you to change between the past and the present at rapid speeds to get through platforming sections, and it's just so fucking cool. I didn't even mention half the things that are introduced in a level to keep things fresh. It's honestly impressive how they keep managing to do this. And I know I said the movement is pretty basic, but there's entire video essays documenting how to push this system to its breaking point. I mean, just look at speedruns of the Gauntlet alone, it looks like a fucking task, it's insane!
How is this so good?
Admittedly, though, when I first played the game, I was kind of put off by how slow your base speed actually is. I was kind of expecting it to be more in line with how fast you are with the wall running all the time. But then I actually sat down and thought about it and realized this is completely intentional and also smart as hell. By making you so slow on the ground, it essentially forces you to remain in the air and always look for opportunities to be off the ground. It makes it so that you have no choice but to use this game system to its absolute fullest. It's essentially a fail-proof method to ensure that you will enjoy the fullest out of the combat. And speaking of that combat... Okay, I'm gonna have to hop off the dick riding train a little bit, except I'm lying. Because the combat is also so fucking good. I'm getting off topic. The gunplay itself isn't really anything to write home about, but what actually makes it so engaging is the combination of movement in tandem to the gunplay. It becomes a completely different ballpark. On the ground, shooting is pretty much what you would expect from a normal shooter, but in the air you'll find yourself constantly getting drop on the enemies that didn't even know you were on the same planet as them. Combined with its really brutal melee system, you get shit like this. Dear God, the gameplay feels so fluid. Running off a wall and shooting off a Touhou bullet hell into unsuspecting enemies will never not be entertaining. The arenas take perfect use of this gameplay by having more open areas with wide spaces in between platforms, with even some fights taking place between a whole group of locations separated by wall running spots, and as you could probably guess, the gimmicks of the level also influence the fighting arenas too. Alright, back to dick riding. How did this game not get a third one? We got Apex Legends instead, are you fucking serious? This is also a game that I think deserves its own video because, hell, I can make a movie based off the time travel level alone. It is fucking insane. I'm genuinely upset this game got overshadowed like it did, but to be fair, it got overshadowed by a pretty verbose game. Yeah, you can stop gripping your monitors now. I'll talk about the Doom game people are actually referring to when they think of movement shooters. After a pretty lackluster third game and the huge development hell Doom 2016 went in, the end result was a game that completely jump-started the movement shooter boom as we know it, and we still see the effects of it to this very day. It resulted in what I consider at the time to be the best shooter game ever made. 2016 combines the original core concepts from the first two Doom games, but added some of the platforming elements of Quake and somehow speeding it up even further than Quake. It doesn't go as far with the movement as Titanfall 2 does, but what it does do, it does incredibly well. It doesn't have a lot new to add to the original formula other than a faster base speed and the double jump. Innovations on top of that would come in Eternal, but the level design alone completely sells it, utilizing to its absolute fullest with large arenas with varying levels of elevation, in which both you and the demons use to your advantage. Certain enemies will go up on the higher elevation points and shoot hellfire down on you, forcing you to either confront them head on or shoot the shit out of them where you stand. Something you couldn't do in the original Doom. And sometimes they hide helpful items in tunnels and in higher points of the battlefield. And when stronger enemies get introduced, it completely starts to change how you maneuver around a fight, with a certain group of demons having to be responded in a completely separate way than another group. You can't fight imps and caco demons the same way you'd fight pinkies and hell knights. Both require two separate styles of moving in order to kill them. That peeking thing you can do in the original Doom sometimes? Yeah, absolutely not. You can't do it at all here. Outside the fights though, the levels don't really offer much in terms of standout platforming. Sure, finding secrets is fun, if the map wasn't horrible, but most of the time you'll just find out that the platforming is just jumping from moving platform to moving platform and trying not to get crushed sometimes. But in the actual look of the level though, in terms of color choice, it's pretty bland, using a mute color palette of red and gray, and it becomes pretty stale towards the end. I can only take so much of red sandstone before I get sick of it. Though I will admit, I'm a bit surprised at how much it actually just feels like a normal evolution of the first two games. Though to be fair, it doesn't really help that this game actually contains snippets of levels from the first two games, but I digress. but honestly, I don't really think it needed to do anything else. Doom's not trying to be this complex movement shooter with a bunch of intricate parts. It's pretty damn basic, but I think that's where the charm comes from. Okay, so now looking at everything, we have a core idea of what a movement shooter is. A movement shooter is a shooter that heavily emphasizes speed and platforming through a diverse selection of movement options that allow you to maintain the speed and traverse the area. And in more direct bullet points, it has these characteristics. I know I dropped the words entertaining and fun a couple times, but honestly, that's just what movement shooters are, which kind of brings me to the actual title of the video and why I'm blaming movement shooters for my disliking of regular shooters. The first shooter I ever played was Halo 2, which I'm counting as a movement shooter. I might get some shit for that, but I don't see why it wouldn't count. It's got the core elements and values that Doom had, that being you have a fast base speed and can't remain stationary. Hell, in this case, it's even more incentivized because of the honestly way ahead of its time AI system will flank your ass for staying still. Decide to camp for too long and an elite will come and push John Chief right in his soft spot.
Today you die. Thus he did smite the demon.
From there, I kind of got the basic understanding that this is what a shooter was. It was fast-paced and it was an always-moving game. And then I played Call of Duty, and it just never stuck. And then I went on to try other ones like Battlefield and even more Call of Duty games, and again, none of them stuck with me, both gameplay-wise and campaign-wise. I think this is why a lot of people can't really recall much about a Call of Duty or Battlefield campaign other than maybe a certain set piece or characters, because the gameplay doesn't offer anything interesting. Most, if not all, firefights can be done by sitting behind a cover and shooting, and yeah, I guess that's the point, it's for realism, but in my opinion, it's just fucking boring. Take Halo again, for example. A firefight cannot be done in the same way. Not only do the enemies not just let you sit there and load lead into them, but they'll also inevitably come to beat the hell out of you. I think the things I pointed out in the 4 examples I used perfectly encapsulate why I like the genre more. And those are just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more freedom in this type of shooter than any other, and that freedom allows for, in my opinion, much better experiences. Games like Ultra Kill, BPM, Dusk, Proteus, and even the most recent example, Neon White, took the core elements we laid down, but added to them and manipulated them. The sky is literally the limit, but even then you can have some type of shooter that manipulates the sky, so that's not even true. This is still just a long coat post, but I do think that movement shooters are just the pinnacle of the shooter genre. And if you want to get technical and nerd Pac-Man about it, they're the most traditional because the first shooters that started the craze were ones that incentivized speed and platforming. I don't know, man, I just really wanted to talk about one of my favorite genres of all time. And cope. The closest thing you're gonna get to anything like a movement shooter in COD games is the multiplayer, which I'm atrocious at, so that's a bit of a no-go. It's interesting though, because Call of Duty was actually starting to lean more and more into movement shooter territory, but then had to scale it back because people started to get sick of it and wanted the old style back. You can actually kind of see it start to form with things like Advanced Warfare and Black Ops 3, which indulged in things like double jumps and wall runs, though not used as greatly as Titanfall, mainly because they weren't even given the opportunity to. But people will start to get sick of the Call of Duty formula, and then they'll go back to the future and implement this shit yet again, only for it to go back to the regular warfare after people get sick of that again. Maybe in the next console generation I'll be able to make a video about the full, true movement shooter Call of Duty game that will inevitably come out once this cycle's over. This video does seem like I'm trying to say that movement shooters are objectively better than others, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I just personally believe that it is, and if you like Rainbow Six Siege more, then more power to you. I'd probably like it more if I didn't die 2 seconds in and had to view the game through cameras that some dickhead shot down anyways.
Throwing flashbang.
What the f-